Shalom, this is Rabbi Yehoshaphat Oliver coming to you today to discuss the very timely concept of medical authority, trust in doctors. We are being told by rabbis, by principals, and by various community leaders, such as people on councils and planning groups and so on and so forth, that they spoke to doctors and the doctors gave their opinion and they've assessed the matter, and therefore people need to be wearing masks and following social distancing, getting tested, getting temperature tests, and so on and so forth. So let's discuss the concept that they're appealing to over here, in the Orthodox Jewish community, which is the halachic, the Jewish legal principle that we rely on an expert. What is the explanation of this concept? So the principle is, Uman, an expert, a professional, Lo mora umnuse. He will not damage his livelihood. So, if a expert is caught, is found to have given incorrect advice that led to some kind of harm, damage to others, then Jewish law says that we rely on his word because he does not want to lose his livelihood. The motivating principle here is his fear of losing his livelihood if he would be found to be knowingly given incorrect, harmful advice. Now, we find that this principle is relied upon in general with regard to a medical system. So, if you send someone to a hospital, then you're allowed to do so, even though something could go wrong. But the principle is that we rely on the system because we presume that there is supervision. We presume that if someone would do something wrong, that person would stand the risk of losing their position, their livelihood, even their license. And therefore, we do allow someone to go to a hospital and so to be treated by any doctor. And based on this principle, we will desecrate the Sabbath, which is otherwise a great sin. So it's a very serious matter to establish that this is a case in which there exists a serious danger which warrants desecrating Shabbos. The law is that one can desecrate Shabbos if there's a serious danger, but who is to decide that a person's illness rises to that level? Well, we would rely on a doctor to establish this matter. So too, when it comes to eating on the holy day of Yom Kippur, when every Jew is obligated to fast. So if a doctor tells a person that he should not fast on Yom Kippur, he should eat something, then we rely on that doctor. He is considered trustworthy. Now, let's be clear that this does not apply specifically to religious doctors. It applies to any doctor. The doctor could be an atheist. He could be someone who is not at all part of your community. It doesn't apply any less to non-religious people, it only relates to the matter of concern for one's livelihood. It doesn't apply more to someone who you know to be very religious and whom you know to be donating lots of charity or coming to the study house to study Torah a lot. It's just all irrelevant. The only consideration is the assumption that a professional will be worried about giving bad advice, and therefore we assume that he's giving advice that is, to the best of his knowledge, in the best interest of the patient, because he is afraid of losing his livelihood. So let's make this clear. A doctor's reliability is not a matter of certainty. It's a presumption. It's what's called a chazaka, a presumption of sincerity in his prescription when other information is not available. However, if we have reason to believe that a professional might be doing something unethical or harmful to the patient, or he might have a specific conflict of interest which might lead him to not place the best interest of the patient as his only consideration, he might, we have reason to think that the doctor might say to himself, well, I'll take the risk of losing my reputation if it gets out that I did this, because I have something strong to gain by doing so. So, in other words, there's some kind of reason why you think that this presumption of legitimacy might not apply in this case. So then that needs to be investigated. And one cannot come along and claim that Jewish law says to rely on an expert doctor, because the issue is not whether he's expert over here. The issue is whether he's reliable. A person could be an expert but be a man of poor character or a woman of poor character who is doing things that are unethical and dishonest and so on. Now, there may be a difference of opinion as to whether something that a doctor did or said, or some position that the doctor has, some maybe a philosophy that the doctor has, or what have you, whatever the argument is to claim that this person no longer has this presumption of not wanting to damage his reputation and his livelihood, whatever the argument is, there might be a difference of opinion. One person might believe that this particular fact or report does damage the presumption of honesty, of legitimacy of that doctor. And another person might disagree. He might say, well, I heard what you said. I heard about that fact. I heard about that report. And you know what? In my assessment, for me, that does not detract from my belief that this doctor is reliable. I know him personally, or I see which college he went to, or whatever reasons that individual might have in continuing to rely on the authority of that particular doctor. That's his right. Each person has the right to choose for himself or herself which doctor he considers reliable, to investigate questions, challenges on the reliability of a given doctor and to decide for himself or for herself whether to continue accepting that doctor's advice. It's a personal matter for each person to decide on his own. And therefore, the whole concept of there being a designated school doctor or a designated shul, synagogue doctor, or office doctor for an office building or what have you, is fundamentally incorrect. It's illogical, and it has no basis, because it's not the place of some other person to make a medical decision for me on which hinges on the question of how reliable is the advice that he's been given by a particular doctor. It is not a matter of democracy and majority rule. There was always an inherent flaw in democracy, which is why the concept of a republic was devised, which is that the majority might decide something that's very much harmful to the minority and completely takes away their rights. So democracy is irrelevant. The fact that here it's not even a matter of democracy, it's just some principle decided that a certain doctor should be the one to make the decisions for the entire school. Well, you can say that the parents should send their child to another school, but that school also has a school doctor. So it doesn't solve the problem that the parent, and only the parent, is the one who should be entitled to make the medical decisions for his and her child. And so too, when it comes to a shul or synagogue, it's up to the congregant to decide for himself or herself how much, which medical authority to rely upon, and in general, how much risk he's willing to take based on his assessment of the situation. No one has the right to coerce someone else into making a medical decision based on their investigation. I oppose vaccines, but if you, based on your research, came to the conclusion that you want to take them, or even that you want your child to take them, that's your right. Let me have the right to make my own choice for myself and for my child. Depriving me of access to a synagogue, that's what's coming with the COVID-19 vaccine, that we'll be told we can't even enter a synagogue without having the vaccine. And likewise, depriving a child of access to an education, in our case, a Orthodox Jewish education, that is fundamentally wrong. That's a kind of coercion, a soft coercion, but still coercion, and no one has the right to do that. In any case, my argument is that this whole principle of relying on a medical authority because they are concerned about damaging their reputation, when it comes to all these issues related to COVID, the alleged existence of COVID, the alleged danger of COVID. So the problem is that any and every doctor today is part of a medical system, and a medical behemoth that is directed from above by a central government agency. There is the existence, the involvement of government power. And that means that this very principle of a medical professional's concern not to damage his reputation, in fact, has the opposite effect from what it would normally have in terms of our assessment of his or her trustworthiness, and it makes that person less reliable, or in fact altogether not reliable. And I'll explain. When a public health agency, such as the Center for Disease Control and so on, whatever it may be, dictates from above protocols and guidelines and recommendations and best practices for all the doctors, then that the fear of that centralized institution affects the mind of the doctors. The government has the power to take away the doctor's license and even lead to fines and even imprisonment for the doctor. And therefore, the doctor cannot truly assess the matter for himself and look at what is in the best interest of his patient in an unbiased manner. He is in a state of fear. He's afraid of deviating from the words of the government. And this overrides the doctor's fear that the news of his poor treatment of the patient will cause him to lose customers, to damage his reputation, and so on. Instead, he is afraid that news of deviating at all from the government's accepted doctrine will cause him to lose his license. Even if he is not conscious of this, his status as a doctor is at risk. He is subconsciously aware of that. It's unavoidable for the government's establishment of officially correct procedures not to create a chilling effect on this doctor's assessment of the best interest of his patient and of his observance of the Hippocratic oath that he swore to. So, yes, without government being involved, we'd have more reason to rely on the word of a doctor. But as soon as government gets involved, the exact opposite is the case. We now have strong reason not to rely on the word of a doctor, in fact, to altogether dismiss his opinion in anything that relates to, that touches on something that the government has expressed an official, accepted opinion on through the public health agency of that country. This is an example of the maxim of Ringo Starr, who said, everything the government touches turns to excrement. So this means that when a doctor says something supporting the official story that conforms with the official story, the guidelines of the government, that has no validity. It's not his true opinion, or it's an opinion that he's giving that is tied to a conflict of interest, and therefore it's irrelevant. The only medical opinion that could be relevant is one of an independent medical professional, which he'd have to be a very unusual person. He might have to be retired, or have resigned, have revoked his license, or what have you, to be truly independent of this monstrous system of control. And I'll just finish by sharing with you experience that I had. I was told that a certain doctor is a shul doctor. He's the doctor that's been designated for that synagogue to make decisions related to medical issues for the synagogue. Well, did everyone in the synagogue agree on that doctor? Because if they did, then maybe there's more of an argument for that. But if it was just a matter of the rabbi or the board appointed that person as a doctor because he's a member of the congregation, well, no, that's not legitimate in my opinion. In any case, so I got into a conversation with him about the validity of the PCR test, that bogus, phony, faulty, fraudulent test that is being used as the basis of the claim that we're still in a state of a pandemic because there's so many cases. Cases are rising. There are cases everywhere, even though there's no increase in death. Completely normal, the amount of death for this time of year. But since there are cases rising, so therefore we all need to be afraid, and the measures should be continued of masks and social distancing and so on. So I said to him, are you aware that there are many serious critiques of the PCR test, that the very inventor of the test said that it's not fit for use as a diagnostic test, and it should not be used for that purpose, and then that he mysteriously died in late 2019 and so on. Are you aware of the issues with this test and the fact that it doesn't even test for COVID and so on? And he just refused to discuss the topic. And he said, well, that's the accepted test, and that's it. And he doesn't know, but he knows that this is what is accepted, and therefore that's what he follows. And that really sums it up. This religious doctor, who's a very sweet guy. I don't have a bad word to say about him other than this particular issue in relation to this particular issue. But he is part of this medical system. That's his livelihood. And therefore, he won't challenge, he won't think critically about the validity of the PCR test, whether to recommend it. He recommends it because it's accepted. It's accepted, meaning that's what's prescribed by the government. That's what he means by that. So, yes, we follow Jewish law. We rely on the opinion of an expert in medical health, but only if that person does not have a conflict of interest, and if there is a clear reason to suspect that person of not having a conflict of interest, then each individual is entitled to refuse to follow to that person's advice, and choose for himself or herself which doctor, which professional to follow, if at all. God bless.